We're going to be in the book of Leviticus chapter 1 this morning, if you want to go ahead and turn there. But before we get started on the lesson for today, I was asked at the men's business meeting to go ahead and read this letter that I wrote to the men of the congregation, in case anybody was not aware of the situation. This is not a decision made lightly, nor one made gladly, but for a while my wife and I have been feeling more and more as if we were meant to be working elsewhere. We've prayed about this and asked God many a question about whether we should be staying or if we should be going, and his answer has seemed to be, "Go where I will send you." We've truly enjoyed working with you all here in Geneseo. And this is a very difficult decision to make. We want to thank you very much for being a family to us for these 2 years that we've spent getting to know you, and we love all of you. I will be beginning the process of looking for another place to work with, and I would be pleased if the congregation here would be willing to support me for up to 3 months as I try to find where God has decided to send me. I will still be covering Wednesday night classes for those 3 months and preaching every Sunday. I do not have an interview elsewhere. With as much heads up for the Sundays as I will be gone as I can give, and I will always, even after we are gone, be available to talk on the phone if anyone needs anything. I will continue to live stream services, but I have the info for the YouTube channel and the church email I made to go with it on the desk in the office. In Christian Love, Caleb, and Tricia McAnulty. That's where I was the Sunday before camp. I was interviewing with the Harlan Church of Christ in Harlan, Iowa. And they have agreed to take me on as their new minister. So we'll be working on getting housing and stuff situated there, and I may have to take off another couple Sundays between the months of July and August to be over there and getting housing set up. But other than that, I should probably be here most Sundays until the end of August. Again, we want to thank everyone here for being a family to us. And we just felt like God was moving us somewhere else. But the lesson this morning is not about me. So we should probably stop focusing on me. It's about our sacrifice. We've been in the book of Genesis and Exodus, the books of Genesis and Exodus, every Sunday morning in Bible class. And the focus of those lessons in the Bible class are on, as much as I am able to, and I recognize I have many shortcomings in this area, of the application of those scriptures to us as Christians today. And I don't think there's much more of a clear-cut case of that application than in the sacrifices of the Old Testament, specifically the Aaronic sacrifices of the book of Leviticus. And that's set out for us in chapters 1 through 4 of the book of Leviticus. Now, we're not going to read through all 4 of those chapters. That would be, I feel, unnecessary and very long. We will have a little bit of a discussion about the 4 different types of sacrifices, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to read the first 9 verses of the book of Leviticus, which sets out what the burnt offering is and its purpose. And then we'll talk about some of the details about the other sacrifices. But it lays out a general plan of application for the sacrifice to follow. Now the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When any of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of the livestock of the herd and its flock. And his offering is a burnt sacrifice of the herd. Let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. And he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. He shall kill the bull before the Lord. And the priest, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And he shall skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and lay the wood in order on the fire. Then the priest, Aaron's sons, shall lay the parts, the head and the fat, in order on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. But he shall wash its entrails and its legs with water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. See, one of the things that the New Testament stresses to us, and when it talks about these sacrifices, is that we have a sacrifice better than all the others. So we're going to be spending some of our time in the book of Hebrews, which heavily discusses this topic. And while the lamb of the Levitical sacrifices carries some amount of power, we'll talk about that more in a minute, our sacrifice carries all power. But in order to understand our sacrifice, we first need to understand the Levitical sacrifices. We need to understand what they did, what they didn't do, what they could do, and what they could not do. The Levitical offerings, there are 4 of them. We have the burnt offering. We just read most of the passage concerning the burnt offerings and the specific way in which it is supposed to be given. But in addition to that, there is a grain offering. And we talked a little bit about that in Bible class, sort of as a side note. But the grain offering serves a very similar purpose to the burnt offering. In fact, it serves the same purpose. It's for the removal of sin. But instead of being an animal, it's grain, ground up into a fine flour and offered to the Lord. The fact that God accepts grain as an offering to him, as an acceptable sacrifice, tells me that Cain's sacrifice back in Genesis chapter 4, or no, that's chapter 3, I was right the first time. It's Genesis chapter 4. Tells me that Cain's sacrifice was rejected not because it was fruit of the earth, but because he did something that God had not asked him to. He offered something not in the specific way that God had asked him to. Maybe he was offering the correct things, but not in the method God had prescribed for them. There is an awful lot of emphasis put on Abel's sacrifice being of the firstborn of the flock, the first fruits, and that is not mentioned when it comes to Cain's, seemingly suggesting that perhaps Cain was not giving his best, being the ultimate reason for its rejection. This isn't a lesson on Cain and his sacrifice, so we'll leave that thought there for now. But the grain offering is offered for the same reason as the burnt offering. It's for the removal of sin. It's the standard offerings, so to speak. You are either offering a part of the flock or part of the herd, or you're offering grain which sustains your life. Whatever you're offering, it's a substantial offering that is your livelihood. and it's used to make an atonement for your sin. What kind of sin does the burnt offering remove? Well, all sorts of sin is what the burnt offering removes. Whether it's sin that you've knowingly committed, or whether it's sin that you've accidentally committed, it is the standard offering to make right your relationship with God under the Levitical law. It is not to be confused with the sin offering, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's also a peace offering, and that's discussed in Leviticus chapter 3. And the peace offering is a unique offering in that it's not burnt up on the altar. It's not completely consumed. Part of it is the fat of the peace offering, for instance. It is offered up on the altar of burnt offering and completely consumed by the fire. But the peace offering is a praise for God for the peace between God and man that God has allowed. And when you offer a peace offering, you first have to make sure that there's peace between you and God. So a peace offering is offered in conjunction with this burnt offering. Now, a truly rich individual is probably going to be offering this sort of full sacrifice once a month. Maybe if they're exceptionally rich, like a king, they might do it weekly. But the idea is you offer this burnt offering, you make peace between you and God, and then you offer a peace offering to celebrate this peace that you've brought about between you and God. And it's to be served as a meal. And yes, this does technically mean that the Passover meal is technically a peace offering. Usually peace offerings were also offered by the priest. An exception is made once a year during the Passover when everyone's offering a peace offering. That's logistically impossible for the priest to offer all of those. So an allowance is made at the Passover for everyone to offer their own. But it's to be eaten all night, and whatever is left in morning is to be burned, because it's holy, set apart for God. And then finally, there's the sin offering. And the sin offering is specifically for the leaders of the people. When a leader, such as a king, has sinned greatly before God, there is a specific order in which they need to sacrifice things. And if the people as a whole sin before God, a sin offering is also required. Technically, the Day of Atonement is a sin offering once a year for all of the people, to take care of any sins that they as a people, or collectively, or individually even, might have done throughout the year that they had not yet atoned for. And the sin offering is to make peace between God and all of the people. If the high priest sins, he needs to make a sin offering. And the sin offering isn't talking about just like little everyday sins. It's really the big stuff that's going to get them into a lot of trouble as a nation. such as the sin in Joshua's day where one man took what was forbidden to be taken from Jericho. Or David's sin with Bathsheba. Or when David took the census unlawfully. Or when Saul kept back from killing all of the animals that he was ordered to kill when he conquered the city. These are the kinds of sins that the sin offering is for. And so we have these four specific types of offerings, and they have their specific purposes, and they have slight variations on them. But what should strike us the most about these offerings is the frequency with which they happened. In order for the priesthood to be consecrated, a bull had to be sacrificed every day for 7 days to consecrate the new priests. On the first day of this consecration, 2 lambs had to be sacrificed in addition to the bull. We'll talk more about these lambs here in a few minutes. After this week of consecration, daily, once in the morning and once in the evening, a lamb had to be sacrificed to maintain the consecration of the priesthood. There are only about 2 times in their history before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 in which this constant sacrificing for the priesthood ceased. Once, before the days of King Josiah, it was then reinstated by King Josiah, and that period of time lasted about 60 years. And then once during the Babylonian captivity, in which there was nobody at Jerusalem to sacrifice. And that period of time lasted about 70 years. But beside that, in their nearly 600-year history, so besides about 130 years of that, for 500 years, there were at least 2 lambs sacrificed daily, just to keep the priests consecrated. The purpose of those sacrifices is just to make the priest holy enough to offer all the others. And there were good periods of time, especially after the Babylonian captivity, in which the fire of the altar never extinguished. Not because that was required. If there were no sacrifices to be offered, the fire could go out. It just needed to be relit whenever there was a new sacrifice. But there were periods of time in which the fire never went out, day or night, simply because of how many sacrifices they had to burn. Because of how many people were coming in and offering sacrifices. And of that 600-year history, the writer of Hebrews tells us it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. It is not possible to offer enough sheep and bulls and goats and turtle doves and grain offerings to take away sin. Not a single sin. What then is the power of these sacrifices? What then is the point? Well, the point is these sacrifices point towards the better sacrifice. They are shadows. Their power is borrowed power. They did take away their sins, but it wasn't because of the blood of the bull or the goat or the sheep or the turtle dove. It was the blood of the Lamb that they represented. When we think of all these sacrifices and we understand how many of them were being offered, and then we turn to our Lamb, who's a propitiation for our sins, he's our Redeemer. We throw that word around a lot, but what is a Redeemer? A Redeemer is someone who buys back that which is lost, whether it's land or a person. Under the old law of Moses, land was supposed to follow the family. Well, what then if it was bought up and it was forgotten whose family it was for a time and then rediscovered? How then do you make right the person who's currently living on it? Well, you have a Redeemer who buys it back for the appropriate price. What if someone is sold into slavery because he had some debt he couldn't pay? If we're following the old law, after 7 years he'd be released. But what if his family wants him back before then? Well, a Redeemer could buy him back, could pay the price the man couldn't pay. And that's what Christ has done for us. He's paid a price we could not pay. We owed the wages of sin, which is death. But if we paid it, that'd just be the due result of our sin. But Christ did not owe that debt, so when he pays it in full. He pays it for all men. Not that everyone is going to accept that redemption, but they could. And through that redemption, he gives us peace in times of trouble. See, Jesus brings peace in the storm. And yes, he came to bring not peace, but the sword. But the peace that he does bring is that thought, that glorious thought that God has it all in control. That God is not going to turn his back on us. That God will always be there with us. See, his blood is capable of removing sin. Not just some sin, but all sin. His blood is perfect. It needs nothing more. It's always perfect. I think that's one of the greatest thoughts that the writer of Hebrews leaves us with. If you would go ahead and turn to Hebrews chapter 10. We'll go ahead and read it in his words. In verse 11 of chapter 10, we read, "And every priest stands ministering daily, and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. But this man, after he'd offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he's perfected forever those who are being sanctified." Those are some of the most powerful words in all of the New Testament to me. That after 600 years of daily sacrifices being repeated forever because they themselves could not finish the job. Our Lord and Savior sacrificed himself once, and it was sufficient. It was, as he said, finished. I said we would get back to those two lambs that are sacrificed on the first day of the priest's consecration. They are often overlooked, but they are no less important to complete this story. And I know I've said this in Bible class, so the people who've already heard this, bear with me. But not everyone was in Bible class. But these two lambs, their blood is sprinkled on the priests. And one of them, the blood is placed in specific spots on the priest to consecrate him. It is placed on his right ear, on his right thumb, and on his right big toe. This is symbolic. For the ear, it is a symbol of something that had previously been discussed in the book of Exodus. If a servant or slave determined that he was better off serving his master forever than going free on that seventh year, as I mentioned, he could have the master pierce his right ear on the doorpost, sealing him to the house forever, dedicating himself to service to his master. The priests are doing the same thing, just symbolically. God is sealing their right ear in service to him forever. And to make it clear that this is something that they could decide to do, just because you're a son of Aaron does not mean you have to become a priest. It means you have the right to become a priest. You are encouraged to do that. But technically, a son of Aaron, a descendant of Aaron, could just live life as a normal Levite. But if they decided to become consecrated, then they are dedicating their entire life to the service of the Lord. They are God's now forever. The blood on the thumb represents their actions. All of their actions now belong to God. Rather than serving themselves, they were to serve God. Rather than having their actions forward their own desires, their actions needed to forward God's desires. And the blood on their feet represented the watchful nature that their path needed to follow. They are servants of the Most High. They needed to watch their steps carefully. They could not stray either to the left or to the right. But instead, they needed to focus on keeping as close to the path of righteousness as they could. They're still understanding they're human. Hence, the reconsecration at dawn and dusk every day. When a Christian is baptized, we come into contact with the blood of our Lamb as well. But you will notice that there is a distinction between the consecration of the Levitical priests and where the blood is applied, and the consecration of the king priests of Christianity, for we are made kings and priests. The blood is not applied simply to our ears, or to our hands, or to our feet. We are completely immersed in the blood of the Lamb. The consecration of our priesthood goes down to the very soul, and we should treat it as such, with the seriousness and dedication that demands. Are we giving ourselves in service to God? Do all of our actions belong to God, or are we serving ourselves? Are we careful of where we go in life, and are we sure of what we do? Because we truly have the greatest gift of all time, that Christ, the Son of God himself, would come and sacrifice himself for us, to become our great high priest. Are we serving God as the priests that we should be, or are we serving ourselves? That's the question that the sacrifices ask us as we study them. How much of our lives are dedicated to service? The appropriate answer, of course, is all of it. But I know that I've got places that I need to grow in that area. And I suspect that everyone being honest with themselves would come to a similar conclusion. But that's why Christianity is a lifelong dedication of yourself to God. If there's anyone here who needs to begin the process of giving themselves over to God, who need to dedicate themselves to the service of God that we've been called to, there stands ready the water that represents the blood of Christ, to receive any and all who need the cleansing power of his sacrifice. We do want to extend an invitation to, having heard and believed that Christ the Son of God, repenting of sin, confessing that belief, and on that confession being baptized, buried in his blood, and rising in newness of life and dedication to him. If there's anyone here who needs to respond to that invitation, if you need prayers, if there's any way that the church here can help you, we do urge you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.